Captain John Miller stood frozen on the bridge of the Earth Defense Fleet vessel Defiant. Through the main viewport, he stared at the massive alien ship that had appeared near Jupiter's orbit just hours ago. It was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. A dark, angular vessel that seemed to absorb the light around it. The ship was at least 20 times the size of the Defiant. Any response to our hails? John asked, his voice steady despite the tension in his shoulders. Communications Officer Lisa Brown shook her head. Nothing yet, Captain. We've been broadcasting on all frequencies for the past hour. John nodded and turned to his first officer. Keep the weapons powered down, Steve. Let's not give them any reason to think we're hostile. The bridge crew worked in tense silence. Earth had been reaching out to the stars for decades, but this was humanity's first confirmed contact with an alien species, and they had bypassed all of Earth's outer monitoring stations without triggering a single alarm. Suddenly, the main screen flickered to life. The image showed a reptilian being with iridescent scales and vertical pupils. When it spoke, its voice was translated by the ship's computer into flat, emotionless English. I am Commander Zorik of the Kilari Imperium. Your species has been noticed. John stepped forward. I'm Captain John Miller of Earth. We welcome peaceful contact with. The alien cut him off. The Kilari Imperium has ruled this sector for 10,000 years. We have evaluated countless emerging species. Some become tributaries. Some become test subjects. Some are deemed unworthy of continued existence. The bridge grew silent. John felt a chill run down his spine. Earth has been selected for evaluation. Zorik continued. You will provide tribute within one standard lunar cycle. The tribute will consist of 20% of your rare Earth elements, samples of all your technological achievements, and 1,000 human specimens for biological assessment. That's not a request we can agree to, John replied, trying to keep his voice diplomatic. Perhaps we could discuss a peaceful exchange off. This is not a negotiation, Zorik said. It is notification. Fail to comply, and we will take what we require by force. Your species' survival beyond that point will be optional. The communication ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. 3 days later, the United Earth Government Emergency Council gathered in their chamber beneath New York City. Fleet Admiral Susan Clark stood before the assembled representatives, her gray hair pulled back tightly, her uniform crisp. The alien vessel remains in Jupiter orbit, she reported. Our analysis suggests their technology is far beyond ours. Their hull material alone would take us centuries to develop. President William Carter leaned forward. What options do we have, Admiral? Limited ones, sir. We can attempt to comply with some of their demands to buy time, or we can prepare for a fight we'll almost certainly lose. Dr. Alan Porter cleared his throat. The physicist looked out of place among the military and government officials, his rumpled appearance contrasting with their formal attire. There might be a third option. All eyes turned to him. I've been analyzing the sensor readings from the Defiant. Alan continued. The Kilari ship gives off unusual quantum fluctuations. Their propulsion system seems to operate on principles that, well, frankly, should be impossible according to our understanding of physics. Your point, Doctor? Susan asked impatiently. Their technology isn't just advanced. It's different. And different doesn't always mean better. Alan pulled up a holographic display showing energy patterns from the alien ship. See these oscillations. They suggest a vulnerability we might be able to exploit. Across the Earth, people gathered around screens as news of the alien demand spread. In Chicago, families huddled together in fear. In Lagos, people filled the streets in protest. In Beijing, engineers worked around the clock to upgrade defense systems. And on the lunar research base, Dr. Alan Porter stared at his equations, searching for the key that might save humanity from becoming just another conquered species in the vast Kilari Imperium. The countdown to Earth's deadline had begun. Lieutenant Kate Bell adjusted her grip on the stealth craft's controls. The ship's skin-tight stealth technology made it nearly invisible against the blackness of space. Her orders were clear. Follow the Kilari scout ship, but do not engage under any circumstances. Eagle-eyed to command, she whispered, though there was no need to be quiet in space. The scout has changed course. They're scanning our Atlantic defense grid now. Copy that. Eagle-eye, came the reply from Mission Control. Maintain your distance. Kate watched as the alien vessel methodically moved from one Earth defense installation to another. They were being cataloged, studied, assessed. The thought made her blood boil. The Kilari had sent 5 scout ships to Earth 3 days after their first message. They moved with complete confidence, ignoring requests to restrict their movements. Earth's military leaders had chosen not to fire upon them, fearing immediate retaliation from the massive Kilari warships still lurking near Jupiter. They're acting like they already own us, Kate muttered to herself. On Earth, news of the alien demand had spread quickly despite government attempts to control the information. In Boston, crowds filled the streets. Some carried signs that read, "Submit to save lives," while others proclaimed Earth will not surrender. At the United Earth Government Complex in Denver, Professor Linda West rushed through security checkpoints. The xenanthropologist had been analyzing data for 48 hours straight. Her normally neat brown hair hung in tangled strands around her face. "I need to see the president," she insisted to the guard. 10 minutes later, she stood before President Carter and Admiral Clark with her findings displayed on the wall screen. "The Kilari have done this before," Linda explained, pointing to historical records from alien databases that Earth had acquired through various space probes over the years. They'd follow a pattern. First contact, then demands for tribute, then conquest. "We already suspected as much," Admiral Clark said. "Yes, but look at this." Linda highlighted another section of data. According to these fragmented records, the Kilari have conquered 17 other civilizations in the past 5,000 years. Each time, they used the same approach. President Carter leaned forward. "And did any of these civilizations successfully resist?" "None that we have records of," Linda admitted. "But there's something else. The Kilari only demand tribute from species they consider worthy, but also conquerable." "So the demand itself is a backhanded compliment," Admiral Clark observed. "Exactly," Linda said. "They don't bother with primitive species, and they don't attempt this approach with equals. The tribute demand means they see us as advanced enough to be useful, but not advanced enough to be a threat." In his lab on the moon, Dr. Alan Porter hadn't slept in days. His eyes were red-rimmed as he studied the readings from the Kilari ships. Something about their quantum propulsion system nagged at him. It was elegant, advanced, but also— "That's it," he suddenly exclaimed, startling his assistant. He rushed to his computer and began typing frantically. "Get me a direct line to Admiral Clark," he ordered. "I think I've found something." In orbit around Earth, Kate continued tracking the Kilari scout ship. She noticed it had stopped at each of Earth's major military installations, scanning them thoroughly. Now it was moving toward the civilian population centers. "Eagle-eye to command," she reported. "I think they're done assessing our military capability. Now they're counting us." The thought chilled her. The Kilari weren't just evaluating Earth's defenses, they were taking inventory of their potential property. Back in Denver, the Emergency Council gathered again. Admiral Clark's face was grim as she presented evidence recovered from deep space probes. "The Kilari aren't just demanding tribute," she explained. "Based on Professor West's analysis and our own intelligence, we believe this is the first step in a complete takeover. The 1,000 humans they requested. They're not for study. They're for determining how best to control us." President Carter looked around the room at the tired, worried faces of Earth's leadership. "Then we need options, real ones, because I will not be the president who surrendered humanity without a fight." As if in answer to his words, his aide rushed in with an urgent message from the lunar research base. The United Earth Government's underground complex in Denver buzzed with tension. Leaders from every major nation sat around the large round table. Security personnel lined the walls. The room fell silent as President Carter entered, followed by Admiral Clark and Dr. Alan Porter. "Ladies and gentlemen," the President began, "we have 17 days until the Kilari deadline. Today we must decide. Do we submit or do we fight?" Admiral Clark stepped forward. Her face looked tired, but her eyes were sharp and determined. "Our intelligence confirms the Kilari have used this tribute tactic successfully on 17 other civilizations," she said. "Once a species submits, they are slowly stripped of resources and reduced to slave labor. No tributary civilization has ever regained its independence." Murmurs filled the room. A representative from India stood up. "But if we fight, how many will die? Their technology is beyond ours." "Perhaps not as far beyond as we thought," President Carter said. "Dr. Porter has made a discovery." "Doctor?" Alan Porter looked out of place among the world leaders in his wrinkled lab coat. He cleared his throat nervously before speaking. "The Kilari ships use a quantum propulsion system unlike anything we've seen before," he explained, using the simplest terms he could find. "It allows them to travel vast distances and generate powerful shields. But it has a weakness." He pressed a button, and a hologram appeared above the table. It showed complex energy patterns flowing through a model of a Kilari ship. "Their quantum field relies on perfect harmony," Alan continued. "If we can disrupt that harmony with a precisely calibrated pulse, we can temporarily disable their systems." "Temporarily?" asked the Russian president. "For how long?" "Based on our models, maybe 15 minutes, Alan replied. "But in those 15 minutes, they would be vulnerable." Admiral Clark took over. "We've developed a plan. A small, focused counterattack that would demonstrate our capabilities without triggering a full-scale invasion. A warning shot, if you will." The room erupted into argument. Some leaders demanded immediate surrender to save lives. Others called for a full military strike, while the Kilari might still be vulnerable. The debate raged for hours. Finally, President Carter raised his hand for silence. "I've listened to all your views," he said. "This is not a decision I make lightly. The lives of every person on Earth hang in the balance." He stood tall, his face resolute. "Throughout human history, we have faced those who would enslave us or destroy us. And time after time, we have chosen freedom, even at great cost. I will not be the leader who surrenders humanity's future without a fight." He turned to Admiral Clark. "Prepare your operation. We will show the Kilari that humans do not bow to threats." After the meeting, Captain John Miller of the Defiant was called to a smaller room with Admiral Clark, Dr. Porter, Lieutenant Kate Bell, and a muscular man he didn't recognize. "Captain Miller," Admiral Clark said, "meet Eric Jones, Special Forces. The four of you will be the core team for Operation Thunderclap." "What exactly is Operation Thunderclap?" John asked. "A demonstration," Admiral Clark replied. "The Kilari believe we are weak, that we will submit rather than risk destruction. We're going to change their minds." Dr. Porter spread out technical diagrams on the table. "We'll need to modify Earth's orbital defense grid to emit the quantum disruption pulse. It will only work at close range, so we need to lure their ships into position." Lieutenant Bell leaned forward. "That's where my squadron comes in. We'll execute a series of maneuvers that appear to be attacking their scout ships, but actually guide them into the target zone." Eric Jones spoke next, his voice low and steady. "Meanwhile, my team will infiltrate the Kilari scout ship that landed in Australia 3 days ago. We've been observing it, and we believe we can place disruption devices aboard." John looked at the plans, then at the determined faces around him. "This is incredibly risky. If it fails, we're no worse off than surrendering," Admiral Clark said. "But if it works, we show the Kilari and the entire galaxy that humanity will not be easily conquered." Outside the complex, The sun set on a world holding its breath, waiting to see if humanity would bow or stand against the stars. Dr. Alan Porter's fingers flew across the keyboard as he adjusted the settings on Earth's defensive grid. For years, the grid of satellites had been designed to detect and track objects approaching Earth. Now, he was reprogramming them to do something much more aggressive. "How's it coming?" Admiral Clark asked, stepping into his workspace aboard the space station that served as Earth's military headquarters. "Slowly," Alan admitted. "We're trying to modify technology that was never designed for this purpose." He gestured to the screen showing the complex web of satellites orbiting Earth. Each satellite needs to be precisely calibrated to emit the quantum pulse at exactly the right frequency. "Will it be ready in time?" Alan rubbed his tired eyes. "It has to be." In a different section of the station, Lieutenant Kate Bell stood before a group of 20 pilots, the best Earth had to offer. Behind her, a large screen showed flight patterns and formations. "The Kilari ships move in predictable patterns," she explained, pointing to the simulation. "They believe their technology makes them untouchable, so they don't bother with evasive maneuvers." She tapped the screen, and it showed a new flight pattern. "We'll approach as if we're making a desperate, uncoordinated attack. They'll move to intercept us here, here, and here." 3 points on the screen lit up. "That will position their ships exactly where we need them when the quantum pulse is activated." A young pilot raised his hand. "Lieutenant, if their shields go down, shouldn't we take the opportunity to destroy their ships?" Kate shook her head. "This isn't about destroying the Kilari. It's about showing them that attacking Earth would cost them too much. We need to be surgical, precise, and restrained." Meanwhile, on Earth's surface in the Australian outback, Eric Jones and his team of 6 Special Forces soldiers lay on a ridge overlooking the landed Kilari scout ship. The alien vessel rested on 3 legs, its dark surface reflecting the harsh sun. "Any movement?" Eric asked his surveillance specialist. "2 guards at the main entrance," she replied, looking through high-powered binoculars. "They rotate every 4 hours. The ship appears to have minimal crew." Eric studied the patterns for 3 more hours before he was satisfied. "We move at dusk," he decided. "Plant the devices on the outer hull near what we believe are their engine nodes. Don't engage the guards unless absolutely necessary." As his team prepared their equipment, Eric checked in with Admiral Clark via secure communication. "We're on schedule," he reported. "If Dr. Porter's devices work as planned, this ship won't be going anywhere when the time comes." Aboard the Defiant Asterisk, Captain John Miller reviewed the tactical plan with his crew. The ship had been positioned in Earth orbit, appearing to be on routine patrol. "When Operation Thunderclap begins, we'll move to these coordinates," he told his navigation officer, pointing to a spot that would place them behind the largest concentration of Kilari scout ships. "The element of surprise will be crucial." His weapons officer looked concerned. "Sir, even with their shields down, their armor is still far superior to anything we have." John nodded. "We don't need to destroy them. We just need to demonstrate that we can hurt them. There's a difference between an easy conquest and a costly one. Our job is to ensure the Kilari understand that Earth will not be easy." In orbit above Earth, Admiral Clark's fleet moved into position, disguising their maneuvers as regular patrol routes. Each ship carried enhanced weapons designed by Dr. Porter's team to maximize damage during the brief window when the Kilari shields would be down. "All pieces are in place," Admiral Clark told President Carter during their secure evening briefing. "The defensive grid modifications are at 82% completion. Lieutenant Bell's pilots are trained. Captain Miller's fleet is positioned. And Eric Jones reports his team will place the disruption devices tonight." President Carter looked at the detailed plans one more time. "And if this fails?" "Then we fight anyway," Admiral Clark replied simply. "But this gives us our best chance." As night fell across Earth, billions of people went about their lives, most unaware of the desperate plan being put into motion to save them from becoming just another conquered species in the vast galaxy. The United Nations Hall in New York City was packed with representatives from every nation on Earth. News cameras broadcast to billions of people worldwide. The mood was tense. Only 24 hours remained before the Kilari deadline. President Carter walked slowly to the podium. His face showed the weight of many sleepless nights, but his eyes were clear and determined. The room fell silent as he prepared to speak. "People of Earth," he began, his voice steady. "For thousands of years, humanity has looked to the stars and wondered if we were alone. 1 week ago, we received our answer when the Kilari Imperium arrived in our solar system." Screens around the world showed his face as he continued. "The Kilari have demanded we submit to them. They want our resources. They want our technology. And they want 1,000 human beings to take as specimens." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Throughout human history, we have faced those who would enslave us, those who believe might makes right, those who see others as merely tools to be used and discarded. And throughout our history, brave men and women have stood up and said, 'No.'" The president's voice grew stronger. "We did not climb from the caves to the stars only to bow before the first show of force. We did not survive ice ages, plagues, and our own destructive tendencies only to surrender our future at the first demand." In orbit around Jupiter, Commander Zorik of the Kilari watched the broadcast with amusement. The human leader's words were being transmitted on all frequencies, including those monitored by Kilari ships. Such defiance was typical of species about to be conquered. It meant nothing. 2,000 years ago, President Carter continued, a small group of human warriors faced a vastly larger force. Their leader was told to lay down his weapons. His response was simple: "Come and take them." The president looked directly into the camera. "To the Kilari Imperium, our answer is equally simple. Humanity does not give tribute. We extend one opportunity for peaceful relations as equals. If this is rejected, we will demonstrate why humanity has survived against all odds." Commander Zorik's amusement turned to anger. This was not the typical response of a species facing Kilari might. Most begged for mercy or offered more than was demanded in hopes of being spared. "Move our main vessel closer to the human homeworld," he ordered his crew. "Prepare a disciplinary strike on an uninhabited area. They need to understand their situation." Back on Earth, Admiral Clark watched satellite feeds as the massive Kilari warship changed course, moving from Jupiter toward Earth. "They took the bait," she said to her officers. "They're responding exactly as Professor West predicted, with a show of force." Dr. Porter looked up from his computer. "The defense grid modifications are complete. All satellites are calibrated and ready." "Lieutenant Bell, is your squadron prepared?" Admiral Clark asked through her communication link. "Yes, Admiral," came the reply. "My pilots know exactly what to do." "Captain Miller, is the fleet in position?" "Yes, Admiral," John replied from the bridge of the Defiant Asterisk. "All ships are in formation, weapons hot, but powered down to avoid detection." "And Eric Jones?" "Devices planted on the Australian scout ship," came the quiet reply. "We're in position to activate them on your command." Admiral Clark nodded, satisfied. She turned to President Carter, who had returned from his address and now stood with the military leadership. "Mr. President, the Kilari are moving toward Earth. They'll likely make a demonstration strike to frighten us into compliance." "And we're ready for them?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Operation Thunderclap can commence as soon as they make their move." Around the world, people waited anxiously. Some prayed. Some held loved ones close. Some stood alone, looking up at the sky where, invisible to the naked eye, humanity's fate hung in the balance. In space, the massive Kilari warship continued its approach, surrounded by its scout vessels. Commander Zorik studied the blue planet growing larger on his view screen. Their leader's speech was impressive. He told his second-in-command, "Perhaps we'll keep him alive long enough to see his people kneel before us. It's always satisfying to watch the defiant ones break." Little did he know that in just a few hours, it would not be humanity that would be shocked into submission. The deadline arrived. In Earth's military command center, Admiral Clark and President Carter watched the main screen as the huge Kilari warship entered Earth orbit. It dwarfed the International Space Station as it passed by, making the once impressive human achievement look like a child's toy. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies," a communications officer announced. Commander Zoric's reptilian face appeared on the screen. "Your deadline has expired," he said coldly. "Your leader's speech was noted. Our response follows." The screen changed to show a small, uninhabited island in the Pacific Ocean. A beam of intense light shot down from the Kilari ship. When it struck the island, the entire landmass erupted in flames. In seconds, the island was gone, leaving only steam rising from the ocean. "That was a demonstration," Zoric's voice continued. "Your weapons cannot harm us. Your defenses cannot stop us. You have one final chance to submit before we target a populated area." Admiral Clark looked at President Carter, who nodded grimly. "Begin Operation Thunderclap," the Admiral ordered. Across Earth's orbit, Lieutenant Kate Bell and her squadron of 20 fighters launched from their hidden positions. "Remember the plan," Kate told her pilots through the comm system. "Approach fast. Appear disorganized. Make them think this is a desperate last stand." The small Earth fighters streaked toward the Kilari vessels. From the outside, they appeared to be flying in chaotic patterns, like angry bees swarming around much larger predators. Commander Zoric watched with amusement. "The humans send toys against us," he told his crew. "Intercept and destroy them. Show them the futility of resistance." 5 Kilari scout ships moved to engage the human fighters. Just as Lieutenant Bell had predicted, they formed a standard Kilari attack pattern, positioning themselves exactly where Earth needed them to be. "They're taking the bait," Kate reported to Admiral Clark. Moving to Phase 2. Her fighters suddenly scattered in all directions, appearing to flee in panic. The Kilari ships, confident in their superiority, pursued them, spreading out even further. "Now, Captain Miller," Admiral Clark ordered. The Defiant and 10 other Earth warships suddenly appeared from behind Earth's moon, where they had been hiding. They moved quickly to cut off the Kilari scouts' retreat path. In the Australian outback, Eric Jones pressed a button on his remote device. "Disruptors activated," he reported. Aboard the Kilari scout ship that had landed in Australia, the crew suddenly found their controls non-responsive. The captain frantically tried to contact the main vessel, but their communications were dead. In his lunar laboratory, Dr. Porter watched the positioning of all ships on his screen. "The Kilari vessels are in position," he announced to Admiral Clark. "Quantum pulse ready on your command." Commander Zoric noticed the Earth warships too late. "What is this?" he demanded. "How do they hide from our sensors?" "Admiral, we're in position," Kate reported as her squadron completed its maneuvers, having successfully drawn the Kilari scouts into the trap. "All Earth ships, shields at maximum," Admiral Clark ordered. Then she turned to Dr. Porter. "Activate the pulse." Dr. Porter pressed the activation key. Across Earth's orbit, hundreds of satellites simultaneously emitted a precisely calibrated quantum pulse. The pulse was invisible to the human eye, but its effect on the Kilari ships was immediate and dramatic. The scout ships suddenly lost their eerie glow as their shields collapsed. The main Kilari warship shuddered visibly in space. "What's happening?" Commander Zoric shouted as warning lights flashed across his command console. "How is this possible?" On the bridge of the Defiant Captain John Miller watched as the Kilari ships drifted powerless. "All ships, target engines and weapon systems only," he ordered. "Precise strikes, minimal damage." Earth's warships opened fire. Their weapons, previously useless against Kilari shields, now struck true. Precision beams hit the engine sections and weapons arrays of the Kilari vessels. Lieutenant Bell led her squadron in tight formations around the disabled scout ships, targeting their propulsion systems with surgical precision. This is impossible. Commander Zorik raged as his mighty warship drifted helplessly. These primitives cannot have the technology to disrupt our quantum fields. Admiral Clark opened a channel to the Kilari command ship. Her face appeared on Zorik's screen, calm and determined. "Commander Zorik," she said firmly, "this is humanity's reply to your demand for tribute." Commander Zorik stared at Admiral Clark's face on his U-screen. The human female looked so small, so fragile, yet somehow she had done the impossible. His mighty warship hung dead in space, its quantum drives disrupted by technology that should have been beyond human capability. "This is impossible," he hissed. "How did you?" "That's not important right now." Admiral Clark cut him off. "What matters is what happens next." Around the Kilari main vessel, Earth ships moved into a perfect encirclement pattern. Their weapons remained trained on the disabled alien ship. "Our quantum pulse will wear off in approximately 12 minutes, Admiral Clark continued. "When it does, your ships will regain power. What you do then will determine whether this becomes a war or a new beginning." On the bridge of the Defiant Asterisk, Captain John Miller watched the Kilari scout ships drifting helplessly. His weapons officer kept the targeting systems locked on their engine sections. "Lieutenant Bell, status report," John called through the comm. "All fighter squadrons in position, Captain," Kate replied. Her voice was tense but controlled. "No casualties on our side. Minimal damage to Kilari vessels, as ordered." In the Australian outback, Eric Jones and his team monitored the grounded Kilari scout ship. The alien crew had attempted to exit the vessel but retreated inside when they saw the human forces surrounding them. "Ground team secure," Eric reported to Admiral Clark. "The scout ship crew is contained." Dr. Porter's voice came through on the command channel. "Admiral, the quantum disruption will begin to fade in approximately 10 minutes. We won't be able to generate another pulse of this magnitude for at least 6 hours. Admiral Clark nodded. "Understood." She turned back to the communication screen, where Commander Zorik waited in barely contained fury. "In a few minutes, you'll have control of your ships again," she told him. "You have 2 options. You can continue this fight, a fight you now know will cost you dearly. Or you can accept that humanity will not be conquered or forced to pay tribute." Across Earth, billions of people watched the confrontation on their screens. News satellites captured images of the disabled Kilari fleet surrounded by the much smaller but now clearly effective Earth vessels. In the United Earth Government Emergency Chamber, President Carter spoke to the gathered world leaders. For the first time in recorded galactic history, a Kilari tribute demand has been answered with successful resistance. Professor Linda West leaned forward eagerly. "This changes everything. The Kilari built their empire on the assumption that less advanced species couldn't hurt them. We've proven that assumption wrong." Aboard the Kilari command ship, Zorik conferred with his officers. Their proud faces showed confusion and, for the first time, fear. "How did they disrupt our quantum fields?" his chief engineer asked. "It should be impossible with their level of technology." "They must have gotten lucky," another officer suggested. "A random pulse that happened to match our frequency." Zorik shook his head. "No, this was planned. Precise. They knew exactly what they were doing." He looked at the tactical display, showing his ships surrounded by Earth vessels. "And if they can do it once." He turned back to the communication screen. "Admiral Clark," he said, his voice now carefully controlled, "it seems we have underestimated your species." "A common mistake," Admiral Clark replied. "One we hope you won't repeat. When our systems restore, we will withdraw to discuss this development with the Imperial Council." Admiral Clark's expression remained neutral. "You're welcome to leave our solar system. But first, we have terms." Zorik's eyes narrowed. "Terms. You will acknowledge that Earth is not subject to tribute demands. You will recognize humanity as a sovereign species with full rights, and you will release all data on other species you have subjugated. You dare to make demands of the Kilari Imperium." Zorik growled. Admiral Clark smiled slightly. We're not making demands. We're offering an opportunity for peaceful relations between equals. Or we can demonstrate our capabilities again, perhaps more permanently next time. On Earth and in space, humans held their breath as they waited for the Kilari response. The future of humanity hung in the balance of this moment. Finally, Zorik spoke. "We will consider your terms." In the command center, President Carter allowed himself a small smile. It wasn't complete victory, but it was something no other species had achieved against the Kilari. Respect. 3 weeks after Operation Thunderclap, the United Nations Hall in New York City was filled again. This time, standing at the podium beside President Carter was a figure that made history. Commander Zorik of the Kilari Imperium. The reptilian leader looked less imposing now. He wore simple diplomatic robes instead of his battle armor. 2 human guards stood nearby, but they were there more for show than necessity. After the events in Earth orbit, Zorik had agreed to come to Earth as a diplomatic prisoner while negotiations continued. For 10,000 years, Zorik told the assembly, his translator converting his hissing speech to clear English, the Kilari Imperium has used the tribute system to test emerging species. Those who submit become our servants. Those who resist are crushed. He paused, his vertical pupils scanning the room. Never before has a tribute species not only refused but managed to defeat a Kilari force. Murmurs spread through the hall. On screens across Earth, billions watched this historic moment. "The quantum pulse technology you used against our ships was impressive," Zorik continued. "The Imperial Council has reviewed the events and reached a decision." The room fell silent as everyone waited for his next words. "The Kilari Imperium formally recognizes Earth as a sovereign world with full rights. No tribute will be demanded." Cheers erupted in the hall and in public squares around the world. President Carter raised his hand for silence. "And the other species under Kilari control?" he asked. Zorik's scales rippled in what humans had learned was a sign of discomfort. "The Council has agreed to reconsider our relationships with tributary worlds." It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. Later that day, in a private meeting room, the core team behind Operation Thunderclap gathered with President Carter and Commander Zorik. "I still don't understand how you did it," Zorik admitted, looking at Dr. Porter. "Our quantum field technology should have been beyond your comprehension." Alan smiled slightly. "We think differently than the Kilari. Where you saw perfect harmony, we saw a pattern that could be disrupted." "It's the human way," Lieutenant Bell added. "We adapt. We find weaknesses. We survive." "Indeed," Zorik said. "The Imperial Council is most disturbed by this quality." Captain Miller leaned forward. "They should be. But they should also see it as an opportunity. Imagine what humanity and the Kilari could accomplish as allies rather than enemies." Zorik's head tilted in consideration. "An interesting concept. It has been thousands of years since the Kilari considered any species as equals." 1 month later, an unexpected signal came from deep space. 3 ships of unfamiliar design approached Earth's solar system. They moved cautiously, broadcasting messages of peace in multiple languages. Admiral Clark, Captain Miller, and the others gathered in the command center as the ships came into visual range. They were smaller than Kilari vessels, with organic-looking designs that suggested a completely different technology. "We're receiving a transmission," the communications officer announced. The main screen lit up to show a being with blue-tinted skin and large, sensitive eyes. "People of Earth," the alien said through a translation system. "I am Ambassador Neri of the Vela Confederation. News has spread across the galaxy of how you resisted the Kilari Imperium." The ambassador paused, seeming almost emotional. "My people have been Kilari tributaries for 800 years. The Ordeni for 300. The Tin for over 1,000. When we heard that humans had forced the Kilari to negotiate as equals." The ambassador's large eyes blinked rapidly. "We had to come see for ourselves." President Carter stepped forward. "We welcome you to Earth, Ambassador Neri. What exactly are you hoping to find here? Hope, the ambassador replied simply. For generations, we believed resistance against the Kilari was impossible. You proved otherwise. We wish to learn how humanity achieved what no other species has done. In the weeks that followed, representatives from a dozen formerly subjugated races arrived at Earth. An alliance began to form, with humanity at its center, not because humans were the strongest or most advanced, but because they had been the first to stand up and say no to tyranny. 6 months after the Kilari's original demand for tribute, President Carter welcomed delegates from 20 alien species to the first Galactic Council for Free Worlds. As he took the podium, he repeated the words that had started it all. Humanity does not bow. Humanity stands with those who wish to be free. Across the stars, the message spread, changing the balance of power that had stood for millennia. The species that the Kilari had dismissed as barely worth conquering had become the spark that would reshape the galaxy.